I can't believe it happened. Just after making the Western Conference Finals, the Timberwolves decided to trade Karl Anthony Towns for Julius Randle, Donte Divicenzo, and a pretty heavily protected first round pick from the Detroit Pistons, which is probably not going to pan out to anything for real. Now, usually I don't really make videos like this, but this trade had me really confused initially. And I think the fans didn't really know how to feel as well. But after sitting on this trade for about a week now, what I have concluded is that this is a weirdly good trade for the Minnesota Timberwolves. When I first heard this trade, I didn't think it really made much sense. Cat was such a special player for them. Not just the fact that he's been there for 9 years, but I felt like he was the bridge that really helped cover any of Ant's weaknesses and also bring out the best of Rudy Gobert. He was probably the only dude in the NBA that actually liked playing with Gobert, and their chemistry really showed together. Power forward is not really his natural position, but when Minnesota moved him to the 4, I think they really discovered something. Karl Anthony Towns was never really meant to be a 5-man. I know he has some post game and he's tall, but he doesn't really possess the skills of a 5-man. He's not really a good defender, he's not going to be a great shot blocker, and he's not going to be a game changer on the defensive end. And then on the offensive end, we have seen some of those memes of him not being able to post up, but unfortunately, it's true to at least some extent. In the Dallas series, they put PJ Washington on Cat a lot, and Minnesota tried attacking that matchup. PJ Washington isn't the strongest guy, but Cat just couldn't move him, and he had to settle for a lot of fadeaway jumpers. And even in the Denver series, we saw some of the same thing. Denver would have guys like KCP on Cat, and he would have a hard time protecting his dribble and staying on balance as he's trying to truck himself to the rim. So putting Cat at the 4 was actually a great idea because now he could play off a great scorer like Anthony Edwards, and he could make plays off the pass instead of trying to create his own shot. Now, overall, Minnesota didn't really run many specific actions, but the one that actually worked out pretty well for them was this play called Horn's Flare, where the ball handler would run a pick and roll with Cat, and then Gobert would screen for Cat. So now you have Cat and Gobert running this pick and roll with Cat going downhill. And it was a great play because Cat can make decisions in these spots, and it allowed the offense to have some structure. Now, on the defensive end, I know I mentioned that Cat's not a game changer, but he played a pretty important part of Minnesota's defense, even though he's not really known for it. He was blessed to have a lot of great defenders around him, but he was a really physical big man that Jokic had to deal with, and he was able to play pretty big forwards like Kevin Durant. So it's not like Minnesota was trying to hide him by any means. Instead, they were actually trying to put him on really big-time players and then using their best defenders to help him out. So to put it shortly, Julius Randle's not going to fill any of those strengths. Like Cat, Randle does play on the perimeter, but the fit doesn't seem as natural with Gobert and Ant, at least at first look. Randle gives Minnesota an extra ball handler that can create his own shot, and he's capable of making step-back threes, and he's much better than Cat at getting to the rim. But I'm not sure that he gives Minnesota the passing threat that Cat ever was. I already know people are going to say, oh, look at his passing numbers. Yes, he does average around 5-6 assists a game. But if you just look at the film, it's pretty clear that Cat is a more versatile passer. And here's the main difference. Cat is a guy that can create open passing lanes. And what I mean by that is, if he has to make a decision between a big man or a guy at the corner, he's capable of moving that defender away to help open up the passing lane that he wants to get it to. Randle's not that type of passer. Instead, he's more of a read and react type of guy. So what that means is he's not really looking to pass, but when there's a double team, there's someone obviously open, and he's capable of getting it out to that guy. That's still a good passing option, but where I think Randle's really going to help is the fact that he's a more physical mold. He's definitely better at playing big boy ball than Cat ever was. When he gets into the paint, he's going to be more productive than Towns ever was. The thing that I'm mostly curious about is whether or not he can play pick and roll with Ant. And the reason is when Ant and Cat were playing pick and roll together, it never worked out as well as people thought it could. And the reason is because teams would just switch on to Cat. But then with Randle, if you're going to switch a smaller guy onto him, he's going to be way more successful at bullying you and then forcing help. And it's not like Randle hasn't played with Rudy Gobert like centers. He played with Mitchell Robinson. He played with Isaiah Hartenstein. So playing with Rudy Gobert is going to be nothing new for him. And that's where I think the offensive potential lies with Minnesota. Having a big man that can handle the ball and be another paint threat is what Minnesota was missing, especially in that Dallas series. Now, the downside is that Randle's not really a catch-and-shoot shooter like Cat. And what that means is when you give him the ball, he's kind of a ball stopper. He's not going to move the ball around all the time. He's going to try to find his own shots. So when you're playing with a guy that holds the ball for too long, and you also have Anthony Edwards that tends to hold the ball for too long, the offense could get a little stagnant. But at the same time, with another ball handler, now Minnesota could stagger Ant and Randle's minutes more often, which is important because Minnesota had a tough time finding offense with Ant on the bench, largely because you can't just give the ball to Cat and have him create offense. So overall, it gives Minnesota more lineup flexibility and more scoring options to make sure Ant's not the only primary offensive creator. Where I'm actually mostly concerned about this trade is the defensive end. Cat isn't a great defender, but Randle isn't either. And a big reason is because of his inconsistent effort. At times, it's very average at best. And I don't like to criticize players for things like this, but when you look at some of those plays, it's pretty obvious that he could be a little bit more active. The thing is, Randle's coming to a place where he's filling a pretty important role. Like I said with Cat, he took the challenge of guarding guys like Durant and Jokic. So Randle can't just hide on a bad player. So if he's not going to put good effort against these type of guys, then they're just going to cook him. If Randle buys in consistently, I think I would lean towards Minnesota actually winning this trade. But that's a very big if. Defense is Minnesota's calling card, and if you're going to have someone guarding superstars and not show consistent effort, that's where we're going to have problems. So that's where I lie with Randle. Donte Divicenzo is also part of this deal, and to be honest, I think it's pretty straightforward. He's going to be a really big plus. He's a really good shooter, and he's got amazing range that Minnesota has never really had, and getting someone like that will help a lot. Divicenzo has shot 40% over the last 2 years on really high volume, so he's going to be great for Minnesota, and he's also a very cheap option. So, speaking of money, the other reason why Minnesota made this trade is because Cat was getting really expensive. If you look at his contract, he's making over $50 million for the next 3 years. So with the team getting expensive, especially with the Supermax coming in for Ant, and you have Gobert and Naz Reid's player options next year, you're probably going to have to offload someone at that point, or else you're just going to have no cap flexibility. Now, making this trade gives them 2 manageable contracts, but Julius Randle also has a player option for 2025. Now, his contract is pretty cheap right now at around $30 million, but as you see, someone like Franz Wagner is getting $50, $60 million. It's probably fair to say that Randle's going to be making more than $30 million after this year. This year is really going to help us see if Minnesota really has Randle in their long-term plans. Given the fact that Randle's on a player option and he's probably going to opt out, there's basically 2 options. They're either going to keep Naz Reid or Randle, or they plan on trading Randle at some point. If I had to guess, I think Minnesota's going to let the first couple months play out and then decide which option to go through. If they end up trading Randle, I really hope Minnesota gets a point guard on this team, because this team right now is being relied on Anthony Edwards to make point guard plays. I know they got Mike Conley, but he's 35 years old, so it's not like he could just play big minutes all the time. I know they also got Rob Dillingham, but from what I've read about him, which may or may not be true, it sounds like he's more of a slasher and a scorer in the pick and roll instead of a facilitator. So if Randle was traded, I would hope it would be for a point guard that could facilitate and set people up, and ideally some big men off the bench just to give them some depth. But overall, I think this trade gives Minnesota more flexibility lineup and cap-wise. But the downside is that they potentially have a defensive liability on the floor. But if Randle can buy in defensively, this trade can benefit them in the short and long term. So that's where I stand. Tomorrow, I'll discuss the Knicks side of things. But if you guys enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.